So the practice of Ashtanga Yoga is based on awakening the flow of the breath internally. And this is accomplished through the proper practice of the asanas, and then the specific application of the breath in the asana to the pelvic floor, the Mula Bandha. And this, when done properly, opens up a space above the center of the perineum called the Brahma Dwara, or the door of Brahma. And the movement of the breath from the middle of the perineum into the Brahma Dwara, or the door of Brahman, is the foundation of the practice of this type of yoga. And making the energy move becomes the support for all of the different practices, which are simply ways that that energy then expresses itself in the world. So the yamas, the niyamas, the asanas, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi are all resting on that energy. And so the practice becomes simple and natural if that energy moves. And so that energy is actually the combination of two different types of movements in the lower belly, in the floor of the pelvis. And this becomes a source of confusion because we like to understand things in more simple, literal terms than this energy provides for us. And so we describe the movement of the lower belly in a dual manner, one as Uddiyanamula and the other as Mula Bandha. And at this point, confusion arises. The two movements are complementary exactly as male and female are complementary, and therefore they're interdependent. They're two ends of the same stick, two sides of the same coin. And also due to the confusion of the term Uddiyanamula, people tend to miss the point. So when we use Uddiyanamula around here, we are not talking about Uddiyanamula Kriya, which is one of the Shat, or the 6 Kriyas, in which you exhale all of the air and suck the entire belly back towards the spine, lower belly and upper belly. Okay, that's Uddiyanamula Kriya, and Uddiyanamula we're referring to is simply the creation of a suction under the belly, immediately above the perineum. So it would be in front of the sacrum. And it's the process of cleaning out the front of the sacrum. And it is something that occurs nearly automatically when you're able to tune the fibers of the perineum so that Mula Bandha starts appearing. And it's often taught as being an inseparable movement from Mula Bandha. And in terms of muscles, it's simply the contraction of the lower bands of the transverse or the oblique muscles, the sheaths of the belly. And their contracting corresponds to the opening up of the lower back of the rib cage, and so the correct placement of the organs in the belly, which of course depends on having the whole rib cage placed correctly. So you have to have space for this occurrence to happen in the lower belly. So usually the practice starts up at the other end of the body. So if you start simply by trying to squeeze the perineum or squeeze the anus, you usually don't get too far. you end up contracting not only the perineal muscles, but you end up contracting the buttocks muscles, and then the abdominal muscles, and then the muscles of the tongue, and the throat, and finally the eyebrows, temples, ears, and thousands of other little muscles contract too. And so we begin at the top, actually. And so the practice begins by, technically speaking, it begins underneath the crown of the head internally, and it involves first a descent through the body, all the way down to the base, and then the process reverses and it grows back up and returns to the initiating point under the crown of the head. In more practical terms, it begins at the area of the heart, just getting the area of the heart to open up, not only to the front, but also to the back. So the opening internally is broad. Just like at the surface of a lake, the opening of a flower has depth to it, horizontally. And then within that space, the mind is clear. And within that space, then the breath drops down, and you can start the cultivation of the energy in front of the sacrum. If you go straight down there with the heart closed, the manipulations that the mind will impose on that energy will simply make it mad. And it'll move and it'll get you. Ultimately, your experience will not be pleasant. And so, through the space of the open heart, which both psychologically and physically, you're able to drop the breath. And that way, you have an attitude of both being creative or trying to arrange for the conjunction of these energies, but you also have a receptive quality, which means that you're able to allow what is to rise up, rather than trying to superimpose on what is your preconceptions of what it's going to be like. So you're working both ways. You do have some inkling as to what the movement of the energy in the lower belly is like, but you're also very respectful towards it. And so you're will move to awaken it, but then you'll give it space. And then you'll move to awaken it, and then give it space. And this is the way of all activity that is yogic. So as we go back to Sankhya philosophy, remember buddhi is the ability of the mind to outline things, to take a presentation and then to trace its borders. And in doing so, one thing is you're initially defining it. You're giving it a name, or you're giving it substance. But then you let it be, because you see that you appreciate its interconnectedness to its background. And so the process of buddhi yoga is the process of one acting and then letting be. And so we could divide the action of the lower belly into that same polarity. We'd define the Mula Bandha as masculine, Uddiyana Bandha as feminine. And if you can also switch the poles if you prefer. You can make the male active, the female inactive, or you can make the female active and the male inactive, as you like, because it doesn't matter. So we work to create Mula Bandha, and then you have to allow it to rise without interfering with it. And you'll make the switching between action and inaction quickly, continuously. So the mind moves like this. And then it'll become dominance. You'll be switching action to inaction. But for a few hours you'll be heavy on the action side. But then after an hour or two, you'll come over, but you'll still be moving like a fish on the inaction side. So the mind is always represented as a fish. It's moving, it's flipping, flopping back to side in a dialogue between action and inaction. And so the symbol of yogic samadhi is a dead fish. It's just lying there and not moving. So finally the two poles have become so balanced that the fish stops. This is the fish of your prana, always followed by the fish of the mind. It's like fish always swim in tandem when you see them. So prana and chitta, the two fish, move. And so the process of yoga is to still them. And then the fish will go into the Brahmadwara, into the core of the body. And that's the beginning of the yogic process. So when we're doing the postures, when we're doing the pranayama, we are cultivating deep down in front of the sacrum a hollowness, a freedom, a movement of some type of breath that you probably already know something about because it's very much part of your living system. It's a scooping. It is the true, what we would call the womb of spirit. If you were Taoist, you would refer to it. And it's a broadening, a making of space, a getting out of the way without neglect. And this is the action of Uddiyanamula. It's like making a nest. And the movement from the perineum is the energy stands up at the middle of the perineum when there's space, or when there's some appreciation. It stands up just like when you have a big theater and the audience all is there, they all applaud, and the actor stands up at the center and takes a bow, waves to the crowd. And so the core energy stands up if the audience is there, spreading out. And so the function is Shiva and Shakti, or background and foreground, horizon and focus. The background is the spreading out energy, which is represented in mythology as the thousand-headed serpent that rises and spreads out. The function of this energy is to get out of the way. And its attitude is that of serving whoever it is that's going to stand up in the middle of this, the baby or the beloved. And so this is actually considered to be an important aspect of God, is the aspect of trying to step aside and to embrace and to support with absolutely no concern for self. So you see in the serpent bed of Vishnu, that's this energy. It's the energy of the yoga asana, called Ananta, or infinite, Ananta Shesha, or Adi Shesha, meaning primordial. And its attitude is simply to shelter its beloved. So it's very much a mothering attitude. And so the mother lets the child be, but it's not neglecting. Okay, so this is what yogic inaction is. More commonly misunderstood to be neglect. Well, since you can't do anything to achieve this, especially if you don't want to interfere with natural processes, I won't do anything. I'm going on a hike. And if God wants me, God can come and get me. I'll be out hiking. He'll know where to find me. This is the misunderstanding about inaction. That one does not act in the way that one does not interfere with something organic. However, if you're in love with it, you can pay absolute attention to it. Say you were a crazy farmer or a crazy garden, more like a garden person. Farmers are too practical. But they grow these beautiful plants. But if they get obsessed with the plant, they start picking on it, or trying to pull on it to make it grow more, the plant gets damaged, perhaps possibly killed. Okay. And so the gardener has to water the plant, nourish the plant, give it sunlight, but most of all, the gardener has to get out of the way and let the plant grow without fudging with it. However, if the gardener decides, well, plants grow on their own, and so I'll just leave town and go on vacation. And they come back and the plant is dead, out of neglect, perhaps out of loneliness as well as lack of water. And so it's one of these relationships where the plant wants you very much, but don't touch, don't interfere. And so this is the energy of the yoga asana, of the yoga of practice. It's to broaden and from a multiplicity of viewpoints, from many perspectives, to embrace the beloved. And then the beloved moves. And so you are simultaneously the beloved and the, what's the opposite of beloved?
Beloved.
Beloved, indeed. But both start with the word be. Okay. So you have both these energies, male and female, or we'll say space and focus, energies internally. And the mind, characteristically, goes one or the other, a fish. It's all male, it's all female. It's good and bad. And it's just like your kidneys. Your kidneys close, your heart opens. You open your kidneys, your heart closes. Back and forth. Trying to sit straight. Close your kidneys, close your heart, close your kidneys. If you did a time-lapse video of a meditation retreat, you'll see people like just fidgeting back and forth, and it's just the mind, the fish, flopping on the beach before it dies. Okay. So, we are establishing this natural unity internally, the natural conjunction of these energies internally, in order to create the process of the practice from the lower belly. So the paradox also is not only here and here, it's in the polarity of the spine itself. In order to rest the mind anywhere, the mind has to enter through the back of the palate, steady. And it's almost with the index of the mind, which is the tongue, the nose, that you guide the mind. Because you're guiding prana. I'm thinking of Ganesh. Ganesh has an elephant head. Elephant trunks actually originate here. So if you look at an elephant's skull, it doesn't look like a normal skull. It looks like a cyclops. It has big eye sockets, but the sinus passage is open here in an elephant, which is very bizarre. So the trunk actually comes from here and down. Try breathing that way. And so it's through the channeling of the breath, through the palate, up behind the bridge of the nose, by refining the tongue, purifying the tongue, till it's quiet, that you can then let the mind go down. So it's actually as if the energy here were like a bee going down and harvesting the nectar or the essences from the different flowers of the spinal column. That goes down and it dips and it wants to travel light, so it doesn't take the whole flower with it. It just picks up seeds or bits of pollen and goes on its way. Okay. And this is intelligence. So intelligence doesn't want to get weighted down with a bunch of stuff, so what it does is it gets data, information, jnana, knowledge, and then it can travel really light. So rather than taking some big thing, manifestation with it, it takes the codex for it, which like a scientist might just take the DNA from something. And being a mad scientist, and I can create this thing later. So you can carry around dinosaurs, if you like science fiction, in these teeny little packages, in these seeds. You carry, humans have seeds too. A little egg and a teeny little sperm. And inside is the codex. So the mind works this way. It organizes one level of manifestation, and by organizing it, it then takes the universal principle from it and just takes that. It's like a key. And so this is the way we accomplish the strange action of the lower belly, is by being subtle. It's hard to bulldoze your way through yoga. People try. They really try. But eventually you run into a big rock or a tree stump and your bulldozer breaks. And then you think, well, I've got to get subtle. The subtlety starts up here, and it's almost like you're refining your own saliva in order to send it down. And then it'll pick up what's important and bring it back to you. So, in order to do these movements, you must open the back of the palate. If there's tension in the back of the palate, you can't work in the core because your mind is externalized. Opening the back of the palate is the same thing as letting these two complementary energies come together. So in terms of mythology, you allow the conjoining of Shiva and Shakti, or Radha and Krishna, you allow that to happen. Whereas normally the mind doesn't want that to happen, because the mind is jealous. It thinks, either I want Krishna or I want Radha, so I got to split them up first, and then I'll go for it. So I'll get rid of Shakti, and I'll get Shiva, or vice versa. Shakti looks pretty good. I just got to get rid of this dude, Shiva. So you're trying to come in and split, and this is the function of the externalized mind. I've got to break these two up so I can get one of them. And it's simple, it doesn't work that way. You're consumed by jealousy because Shiva or Shakti always get each other. And meanwhile, you're just dying. And so what you have to do is internally, you have to step, I don't want to say step back, step out of it, And you become totally non-envious or totally pleased when they are pleased. Okay? Because if there's identification with any of the energy, there's a you there that makes true pleasure impossible. And so if you can be pleased when these internal energies are pleased, they will come together. And it's just natural. It's just like water flows downhill. There's not a lot you have to do. They come together. And you are more than pleased. You're ecstatic that these two primordial lovers have come together inside. If the mind lets it. So that's what Mula Bandha is. It's the conjoining of these two internally. Even your breath is not your own. It's their breath. And hence the difficulty in the practice, because the mind always tries to take piece of it, piece of the action. It's actually very difficult to do that, because the mind either goes into jealousy. Has anyone ever experienced that? Yeah. Maybe not in yoga, but if you see somebody else doing well, but you know that they're just like you inside, you think, why that rat, I know they're rotten. You're just waiting for them to blow it. Yeah.
So the mind is jealousy? Uses it for...
That's one of its manifestations, is jealousy. Yeah. So the thing is, as long as there's this false ego, there's this projection onto some feeling or something you're projecting on, you're thinking, that's me. And so I have to get this certain set of sensations in order to be satisfied. And you're asking Prakriti, or just creative energy, and it's an impossible request because the energy is always changing. There's nothing permanent in it. There's not a thing at all in it that's permanent. So you have an impossible request. And then even in your best intended relationships, because you have no ultimate understanding of what happiness is, you are either going to be negligent or manipulative to some degree. Either self-serving, I'll serve you because I'll get something in return, because I need something in return. So as long as there's that desire there, at some level, maybe not with everybody, will it be a problem, you'll just be a normal person. But occasionally, situations will occur where, it's the selfishness takes over, your desire. And it could be an altruistic desire, because you'll have a preconception of what that person should do to be happy, which you might cram them into. I know what you need, okay? You need to jump back more. And so, there are all these little taints that come from avidya, or ignorance. not seeing things as they are. And as it is reflected in your activity in the world, your relationships with other beings, so it is reflected in your breath on this inner core, with your based on a mythological level, an archetypical level. Is that the right word? Archetypical? Or archetypal? Archetypical? You haven't got it clean with Shiva and Shakti, the primordial lovers. You'll either identify with one of them, which is a common occurrence, but it isn't exactly correct, because they are each other. Just like inhale and exhale are the same. One is Shiva, one is Shakti, one is inhale, one is exhale. You can't say, I'm just going to take the inhale. You gotta forget the exhale. Get rid of that thing. It's a drag. I don't like exhaling. That's practical. So it's appreciating them. You see the inhale and the exhale, and you see the exhale and the inhale. You see how they interrelate like two lovers, prana and apana. And then they both shine inside. And it's sweet. It's almost like a mother's love for a child. Yeah.
When you talk about the refinement of saliva, is it the essence of the tongue that goes up into the open palate while the tongue?
That's my understanding of it, which could be severely limited by avidya, as well as desire, lust, and jealousy. However, it is my understanding that you have a choice. You can either put your whole tongue up there, which is quite a feat, because you have to sever that ligament down there. And then you massage the tongue, and then you stuff it up into your sinuses. Which I've thought about doing. I've really thought seriously about doing it, because I think it'd be kind of neat. But I've never done it because I can't quite bring myself to do it. And I've never had a teacher who thought it was a good idea. If I had a teacher that said, this is what you should do, I would probably have done it. But my feeling just from practicing is that the energy of the tongue rises up from it, just like a ghost comes out of the body. And the energy of the tongue goes up into Kachari Mudra. And it's just that same thing of like taking the mind, because the tongue and the mind are so related. Like your tongue is flapping all around. It almost embodies the language, quite literally. And if you can get your tongue to take it easy, then you'll probably be much happier. This thing can get you in trouble. I have experienced that. Okay. Yeah. But it's the energy of the tongue. Curious to me, I don't know if anyone would agree with this, the word for the individual self is called Jiva Atma in Sanskrit, meaning the little particle of God that is God, but it's the little you inside is Jivatman. In contrast to Paramatman, meaning supreme self. And to realize the identity of Jivatman and Paramatman is yoga. There's no difference. But to me, Jiva is an interesting word. It means life. It also means the individual. But at Jiva, we put an extra ha, Jiva, means tongue. And they describe the Jivatman sometimes as a little tongue of fire at the center of the heart. It stands up. So my mind thinks, well, tongue. It feels like a tongue. And the Chinese say that the root of the tongue is the heart. So, that's my idea, is that the tongue. But it's very much like when you're relishing food, or the idea of like, if you go to a temple in India, or if you go to a great teacher, you'll often get prasad, which is food. It means mercy, actually. But it's often, they give you some food, and you take it with a relish, usually sweets. If it's India, it's usually sweet. But sweet is easy to, it really opens up the back of the palate. And just as you would relish it, as if it were giving you life. So, in meditation, you're, in a very similar way, physiologically, you're relishing the self, the Atman, the core of the core. So it's an aesthetic relishing. And that relishing is done throughout. And so Mula Bandha is just the initial action. It's like you're just taking essence from the field of the perineum, and you're going up and up. Most of the action you don't do. You allow them to do it. What you do, you have to do something though, because it's not a free ride. Just like when you're gardening, you've got to do a little bit. You got to put the seed in maybe, and you got to water it. The Yoga Sutras use a wonderful metaphor of farmer irrigating. A farmer who's might have extensive fields has set up irrigation canals and ditches. And in order to fill those, all he has to do is take a shovel and he just breaks a little earthen dam off of a main water supply. So he just takes that little piece of dirt away with one shovel, and then the water flows into the network of his fields and floods the fields. That's the way they used to do farming anyway. So yoga is just like that. You just have to remove the teeny little block, and then the flood will come, and it'll automatically flow through the correct circuitry in the field. And it'll water it, gravity will pull it down, whatever the different physical, it's all taken care of by the nature of it. But you have to remove the block so that it flows. What is that block? Yeah. What's the block physiologically? Yogic practice-wise. Yeah, the whole body.
Tension.
Yeah. Any particular tension?
That little ligament.
I think we're in the right area. I think we're close, yeah. Real close. That's your homework. Is to find that block. And just like a good farmer, remove the block and that waters your fields. And then they grow on their own.
Doesn't it vary what that block is? Or are you speaking of specific
or a big block? Well, you would have specific, if you limited the field, you could find specific blocks. There were just specific keys to open something, or particular specific situations. Like this is blocked, people always talk about, well, I'm blocked that way. So they need to acknowledge somebody, and that releases a block, or then things start to flow. I need to confess my crime. And finally confessing it, it flows. I feel the energy flowing again. And so physiologically there are blocks too, which are simply knots, grunties, or blocks. So it said the Sushumna Nadi is blocked at the base, the Brahma Granthi, which blocks the Brahma Dwara, and then there's the Vishnu Granthi, and then the Rudra Granthi. And the Granthis are basically ego, which is, it's called the Achitta Granthi, where you have taken consciousness and tied it to what is unconscious. The consciousness thinks it's this, and it's actually something that's grabbed on, that's unconscious and changing, and it's decided that that thing's permanent, and that forms a knot. And internally there are these three knots. And different texts put them in different places. Yeah. The field has been prepared, yeah. Who prepared the field? Who's the great farmer? Yeah, it's always a little of this and a little of that. It's much of it is given as a gift, but you are responsible for framing it, outlining it, naming it. You have the naming power. Who you are is another question, but you have the power of creativity, of naming things, of categorizing them, outlining them. That's your intelligence. It's your responsibility to do that. However they might be given to you. Just like your circumstances. These are your circumstances, and then your life situations, your circumstances. There's not a whole lot you can do to wiggle out of it. You can't change your skin color too easily. There are methods, but or change your nationality, or get rid of your parents. Even if you get rid of them, they'll haunt you. Okay, those things are given to you. They're a gift, and you have a unique set of circumstances. How you frame it is up to you. How you name it. And so you have that ability to name it. And so through that naming process, you can accommodate the opening of your heart.
So when you talk about our homework being to find this obstacle, are you actually talking about more than just our lack of attention? Are you talking about an actual
thing?
Yeah.
That was Arjuna had that question in the Bhagavad Gita. Because Krishna describes Saguna Brahman and Nirguna Brahman, or meditation on a form, or meditation on what is formless. And so, which is better? That was the question. Which type of meditation? They might remember the answer to that. Gita scholars. That's your homework, is to find out which is better. Because ultimately, anyone you know that the object of meditation becomes what's called the bija from the Yoga Sutras, the seed that captures the mind. But then you have nirbija, you have to drop the seed to enter into a deeper meditation.
Is that what happens in yoga when you have two opposites in balance? In the body, physically?
You have to drop the seed in order for the two to come into balance. Because then the form begins to have, at some point, a bias to it. It tends to be exclusive of other forms. And then when you are able to still the mind and you experience the form in front of you as interconnected to everything else, okay, that's what's it called? Sampragyata samadhi. Samadhi with the content, specific content in the mind. So the mind is specifically relishing something specifically beautiful. And then that dissolves on its own. It's dropped. And so the meditation on a specific, like you take a specific point in the body or a specific sensation and fix your mind on it. And the mind will then become steady. And then there'll be an appreciation of whatever that thing is, in the sense that you will no longer be reducing it to a bunch of theories. You won't be thinking about it. It will rise up on its own, empty. And then you forget it. Automatically you forget it. And this is the threefold process that we talked about before, where you take the citta vritti, which is the way your mind, the pattern of your mind, whatever the thought pattern is, and you make it so that the vritti holds still, which is no easy trick in itself. You have to give it a lot of space. You have to pay very close attention to it, giving it a lot of space, and its pattern will go in a holding pattern. So it'll start to have, in that holding pattern, richness or content, because it's got to hold your breath, it has to hold all the levels of your being. Otherwise your mind's going to flip away from it. And so then there's a sacred vritti. It has captured the mind, but it is definitely form. Who knows what type, but it is, it has a definite form to it. And then you forget it. It's dropped. And that's, forgetting is automatic. It almost becomes transparent or shy. And then it's meditation on nothing in particular at all. So it starts out particular. The particular is then seen to be universal. Well, this thing is inseparable from everything. So this is the symbol. It's symbolic to me psychologically of a black hole, or the whole universe is this little egg. Excuse me. He blew out his eardrums. So my buddhi has done that. The intelligence traces the outline and names it. It's going to name this thing sacred. This is the golden egg of the universe, this ball. Everything is inside of it, because I say so. And it's simply a symbol to me. And inside this, and outside here is Nowheresville. Okay, this is the altar. And my whole mind will go into that. And everybody's in there. My mommy, my daddy, my kid, my wife, the yoga studio, my friends, they're all inside this egg. And you can take any pattern And by making it still, it becomes sacred. So it's like a deity in itself. This is the egg deity. Right? And the mind is fixed on it, on form. Even though I know better, that God is formless, everybody knows that, But they've come together. I've seen Shiva and Shakti come together as this egg. And then it drops. It's so sweet, or it's so satisfying, that it goes away. And that's asampragata samadhi. And then sometime later, there's a gap. There's another presentation. And that's what's happening anyway. When you're thinking, just sitting there thinking, there's gaps. You take an idea, and the idea in some very broad sense of the term becomes sacred. It starts to contain things that anybody knows isn't there. Like this book contains tons of wisdom. Yoga Sutras. Wow. This contains universes of knowledge. Okay. You do that with any idea. You had a category, and all of a sudden it starts containing vast things. And the more you can appreciate the content of the word, the more the mind will stay with it. So you're taking a form, you're sacralizing it, making it sacred, holy. And then, when the mind is still, then finally it just naturally dissolves. And that's the cycle of samyama. That's in the Yoga Sutras. And that's the way the mind generally works, because it's taking a bunch of data, collects it together to make some sense out of it. Oh, I got it, you forget it. And then something else. And then you try to string them together. It's just this networking. Now what we're doing is taking that process, slowing it down, and so that it really starts to include a lot of stuff. Till you cover all those fields. No shadows. Ordinary thinking, we're tearing things from their background. It just becomes very complicated. We better quit while we're still here. So the Om is Saguna Brahman, the silence is Nirguna Brahman, that it arises from, and they're actually inseparable. Or the A is Nirguna, the U is Guna, the is the dissolving of the quality back into formlessness. And you can see it, you can arrange it all different ways. Shiva and Shakti, the two lovers coming together, just magnetically, just on their own. Yeah.
Shiva and Shakti seem to be so in opposition to each other all the time. Why is there always equality to all of the other things? Always incompatible. You're always saying like Shiva and Shakti are lovers. One is always cradling and following the other, but never quite ever.
Well, they have their spats too, They
We ever get together.
So it's a cycle of union and separation. They pull apart in order to come back together. Pull apart in order to come back together. Yeah, so they said the true course of love is like a snake. It's never straight. Yeah. So there's a type of maya or illusion that is internal or yogic illusion that takes place. And it's simply the play of these energies. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with their separation because they're coming back together. If they were one, if they were just stuck together, how boring it would be. Okay, like if you had your beloved and you might think at one point, boy, if I were just glued to them, that'd be fun. And so it would be fun only during that cycle in which that gluedness was in contrast to being unglued. But then you'd be, after a few hours, you couldn't pull apart. You know, this epoxy on your forehead, you're like, oh my, it's like something from the Twilight Zone, you know. You got your wish, and now you're stuck with this person. And you would have no universe anymore. It'd just be empty nothing. And so you pull it apart. But so it's sacred. The fact that you don't always, the fact that you're not always in samadhi is the nature of things, which is wonderful.